So welcome again. Hope you all are having a great afternoon. It's been an enjoyable experience for you so far. Just as by way of introductions, so my name is Evan Small. I'm a faculty member here at Elon University, where I teach in our School of Education, and I also direct our adventure-based learning programs here on campus, all of our outdoor education and community development work. And I'm joined by Grace Cantino. Please want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Grace. I'm a junior at Elon. I'm studying environmental science, environmental education, and Spanish. I work for Evan in experiential learning and outdoor adventures, and I was recently hired as the new team leader. And yeah, we're excited to have you all. We are wearing masks, I know, but we wanted to be together for the presentation rather than on different screens, so that's why we are wearing masks.
We promise we have faces. Awesome. All right. So again, welcome to our session, Sustainability for All, promoting a critical and anti-racist view of sustainability in outdoor education. Grace and I are both experiential educators. You know, presenting virtually and presenting with a PowerPoint is not really our sort of typical forte. We are going to try and make this interactive if we can. So we are going to have a couple of sessions with some breakout rooms. Please feel free to use the chat. Grace is going to be monitoring that. So please feel free to ask questions as we get going through things. If you are so inclined and are interested in turning on your camera, it's nice to be able to see some faces rather than see a bunch of blank screens, but that's totally cool either way, whatever works best for you. Yeah, it's an exciting topic that we're going to be talking about. We hope that at the end of the session, you leave with more questions than answers. That's part of our goal here. So we're really going to sort of be problem posing a little bit, thinking about some things that we might typically take for granted, things like leave no trace, things that we sort of have built into our psyche as outdoor educators. And we're going to problematize that a little bit. We're going to tweak it, ask you all to think about something critically, think about some ways we can re-envision some of our work. I know you all are also coming from probably a variety of backgrounds and experience levels, and we do welcome all of that. So please bring in your expertise. Grace and I are not the only ones who know things here. You know, we really want to act as a facilitator in this and help, you know, encourage some conversation and some discussion amongst us. Like I said, please use the chat. We will have a couple opportunities to get you all in some breakout rooms talking with each other. So that way it's not just us talking at you for this portion. So to get us started, we are going to ask a real quick breakout room just to do some introductions. Part of our goal is to get you all to have a little bit of a sense of community with each other. That also dovetails into our work around critical theory and anti-racism. We have to think about us as a community, right? We can't just engage, you know, individually or in a vacuum. So we want to create at least some extent of a community. So we're going to ask you all to introduce yourselves to each other in a couple different ways. And so, why are you here? Why are we here as a collective, either as, you know, part of the conference or sort of, you want to say that, you know, really philosophically you're welcome to. And then what are you looking to get out of this experience? Why did you choose this session of all of the ones you could have chosen? What brings you here? What are you hoping to walk away with? So we're going to give you all probably about 3 or 4 minutes in a breakout room, have a quick conversation with each other, talk about, you know, what are you interested in? What are you hoping to gain? So Natalie, if you could go ahead and send folks in whenever you're ready.
All right.
Well, welcome back, folks. Hopefully you'll have a chance to make some connections, have some quick conversations with folks, and see if there's, be some shared interests or shared similarities. And, again, we're excited to engage in some further conversation with you all. All right, so we're going to ask you all either to unmute yourself or type into the chat box, whatever you're feeling. Some quick sort of framing questions. So what are you currently doing in your work? How does that tie into sustainability and environmental conservation? And then how are folks reacting to that? What do you hear from participants? Are folks giving you any sense of, this is great, but, or I'm really interested, in this and I want to learn more? Sort of, how are folks responding to what you're currently doing? So either if you want to unmute yourself and share some of this, or put it in the chat box, either of those are great. But we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I could speak if you want me to. So I'm Amanda Randazzo, and I'm based in Albany, New York. I work for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is, how to be more inclusive in our messaging. And we are specifically doing more outreach around Leave No Trace lately. And, our folks are starting to become aware of issues with that messaging. So we want to make sure we're using Leave No Trace in a positive way. And I think some of the issues we run into that are, Leave No Trace is sort of tried and tested. And so people are very focused on that idea and are hesitant to change things about it. But I think in a lot of ways, it's just how we use Leave No Trace. So we're just trying to help people think about it a little differently. And I'm actually my plan is to sort of like take some notes here and share people's thoughts and ideas with our Leave No Trace planning group. So hopefully we can get more perspective from people.
Awesome. You shared some really great things that I want to just highlight because we will mention them later. So that focus on the tried and true. We've been doing it forever. This is really great. Why bother changing it, right? So it's not necessarily that we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but we are asking y'all to critique and to challenge some of those long-held, long-standing beliefs and thoughts. And you also mentioned the implementation piece of that, right? Like we can have all of the best systems and policies and practices and ideas in the world, but when we talk about, actually putting them into practice, that's where some of these issues might arise. So we'll touch on both of those a little bit later. Grace, you want to read some of the chats that we've gotten?
Yeah, so Kristen Wilcox says, I get a better reaction from younger people in my programs, and I get a little more pushback from older participants. Do you mean specifically with Leave No Trace or kind of just in general?
I would say mostly in general, but relating to like environmental conservation or any programs like that. Some of my older population, and this would be probably like adults 55 and up that are participating, or I get a lot of retirees, military retirees in my programs who maybe don't believe that we need to conserve or recycle or do any of that kind of stuff. My younger people are all about it and they're excited about it. But my older people are not interested, or maybe, I don't know. I'm maybe not a nice way to say it, but they just don't seem interested, to be honest with you. They're kind of like,
No, that's a really interesting observation, and thank you for sharing. We also have Alexis Gonzalez who says, I'm currently building a teen employment program that I'm hoping will have some environmental conservation components, but I don't have any implemented currently. Well, we hope that you take something away from this. And then Michaela says, I'm not currently working, but within my own home and with friends, I have been educating them on how to be more sustainable on a day-to-day basis. Sustainability and conversation are, I think you meant, yes, conservation are two very important things to me, but half of my friends welcomed it and half are annoyed. With my family, older, did not really care that much. So kind of the same shared feeling. So how do we get more people to care about sustainable recreation, sustainable use of our resources, all of those things. So thank you so much for contributing, guys. We're hopefully gonna cover some of those things in a way that makes sense and is digestible, and that you can take something away from this at the end. Again, with more questions than answers.
All right, so we're going to just really quickly define our terms, make sure folks know what we're talking about, make sure that we're all on the same page. So hopefully we know what sustainability is because we're here, right? So hopefully this is not a new term for you, but we wanted to offer just a definition for you all to consider. This is from our Office of Sustainability here at Elon. Grace, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. It's basically focusing on the triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profit. And so just to read aloud, sustainability explores the dynamic interactions among environmental, social, and economic systems in order to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's very similar to like an adaptation from a Native American saying that like we borrow the earth from our children, and so how are we responsibly in that relationship with the earth presently to make sure that in the future nothing is exhausted and destroyed to a point where the future generations can't utilize those same resources that we get to use today.
Yeah. And an important subset for us in the outdoor education world is the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. And so if folks are not familiar with Leave No Trace, it's a national organization that thinks about ways in which we can appropriately and responsibly engage in the outdoors. So I'm a Leave No Trace master educator. Grace is a Leave No Trace trainer. We implement it fairly extensively in our programming here at Elon. We're going to talk more specifically about the principles and about what it actually entails later on. But if you're curious, lnt.org is a great resource. It has lots and lots of resources and information about Leave No Trace. But it is this idea, an idea and sort of a philosophy of how folks should engage or could engage responsibly in the outdoors. All right, our next couple of slides have some text-heavy pieces to them, so I apologize in advance. We want to make sure that folks understand both critical theory and anti-racism, because those are very complex ideas and very complex topics, but they're pretty central to what we're going to talk about in the rest of our conversation. So just as a very, very, very brief overview into critical theory, there's lots and lots of books and resources and other great things that you can check out. But it's asking us to think about those systems, those structures that are at play in our society and in our world, how they were constructed, why they were constructed, for whom were they constructed, and then what are some of the ramifications of their continued existence. So as you think about critical theory, it's asking us as folks engaging in changing the world to think about liberation and equal access for all folks to order them to participate in that society. So think about what are we able to achieve? What are the power systems that either help to lift folks up or help to keep folks down? Right. So part of this is thinking about critiquing the dominance of a positivistic standpoint. So again, for folks who aren't as familiar with positivism, the focus on an objective truth, on science, right? And I'm going to I know we have lots of environmental conservation folks and lots of environmental scientists, so not to hate on the science world too much, but it's critiquing the idea that there is one capital T truth, right? So we think about context, we think about identity, we think about culture being really part of the knowledges that we bring to a space, and opening the possibility that there's more than one truth. So there's another idea to sort of think about the things that are part of critical theory. So we're looking deeply into powers, systems of oppression, power, privilege, identity, intersectionality, all of these things that are going to combine to import some ability to act with the systems at play. The important thing to notice about both critical theory and anti-racism is it's not about assigning blame. Right? It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how things were created, but it's not thinking about what is my role in creating them. Right? I didn't create racism, but I do benefit from it. So it sort of depersonalizes some of this and thinks more about what individual actions can we take that either perpetuate or can help dismantle these current systems. Well, Joe, this is super, super dipping the toe in the water. So if you have questions, please feel free to shout them out. And anti-racism has become more of a popular term recently. So you might have heard folks like Ibram Kendi speak about it. It's become a whole lot more sort of a buzzword to some extent. But again, it encourages us to sort of take critical theory and apply it more specifically and more focused onto ideas of race. Not to say that we're ignoring the importance of intersectionality and other identity categories, focusing on how race is central to the construction and maintenance of dominant systems. So I found an interesting definition in a quote from the National Museum of African American History and Culture to offer to you all. So it's not just saying, we can't just acknowledge the existence of racism, we have to actively work against it, right? So part of this, again, the systems and the structural piece that we're thinking about, what are those things that exist within the society? How do those things determine the individual's ability to move with, interact with, or engage with that society? Again, are we promoting some folks? Are we oppressing some folks, right? So it's sort of naming these things that we might have always been maybe aware of or been vaguely knowledgeable about, starting to put some additional context to it. You might have also seen this. This has also been pretty prevalent in and around social media over the last several months. But one of the things we wanted to offer to you all is thinking about what's it going to take individually for you as a person, for you as an organization, for you as someone who exists within a society, to move further to the right on this spectrum. Right? Knowing that anti-racism is something we never achieve fully, we can't ever arrive at a spot where we can say I'm 100% anti-racist. What we can say, in every space I tend to be, I take actions and take steps towards anti-racism. And so for some of you, attending this session might be one of those steps, right? That might be pushing you into maybe that learning zone, right? Where things are a bit uncomfortable, you're not really sure about some of these answers. It's way easier if we think about the fear zone to not talk about this, right? It's very, very easy for us to say, yeah, this doesn't really impact me, I don't really need to acknowledge it, not really something I need to think about too much. We start pushing ourselves, again, as individuals and as members of an organization, to think about and to name and to be more cognizant of these systems that are at play. It pushes us towards this right-hand side. And so we're eventually moving on to thinking about, conversations that we have with other folks. How are we lifting up and challenging policies that might exist at our organizations that are inherently racist or oppressive? How are we encouraging the voices of other folks who need to be heard and who aren't heard in certain spaces? And we'll do a little bit of that later on throughout our conversation. Yes, as a way to offer to you all, we're never going to get there, right, fully, but we can start to move further down the progression. All right, this is a fairly common image. You might have seen it or something like it. Just again, define some terms, right? We tend to think about equality versus equity. So equality, the folks on the right-hand side, everybody gets, or left-hand side, excuse me, everybody gets the same things. Everybody gets the same set of resources. It ignores the reality, though. Right? Some folks are starting from different positions. Some folks are starting from further ahead or further behind. Equity are things that folks are getting the things that they need in order to access and to thrive in that space. So a metaphor you can think about, equality, if everyone gets a pair of shoes. Equity, everybody gets a pair of shoes that fit. Right? It's an important distinction there. So folks are getting the things that they need in order to thrive in that space. We wanted to critique this and push it a little bit further and offer two additional frames for you to think about. So again, like I mentioned, the reality on the far left, right? Some folks have very unequal positions, and that's an important part of naming and being cognizant of. When we think about equity and equality in the middle, and then part of our work through critical theory and anti-racism is identifying structures and barriers that exist. So in this idea of a baseball game, there's folks in the back of this picture, right? There's folks in the stands. People could access it. Why are the folks on the outside on the outside? Why is there a barrier that exists in the first place? Can we be more critical and can we examine the barriers? Right? Rather than providing resources, in addition to providing resources, can we critique the existence of barriers in the first place? So part of this is helping, again, us move towards that goal of liberation, where folks are able to access spaces in an equitable manner and ensure that everybody has equal access. Okay. All right, so we're going to shift gears slightly. Talk about, so again, just defining our terms to make sure folks are on the same page. We want to offer a bit of a video for you all to think about. So this is a keynote speaker at the recent Outdoor Economy Conference, which is here primarily in North Carolina, but other folks might have attended it as well. I'm going to just play a little bit of his introduction to help sort of set the stage for why this is important in our space.
So, love that introduction, really appreciate it. And what most of you folks know is that I have been tasked with opening up and talking about what are the core barriers and driving factors behind the lack of diversity in outdoor recreation. And we cannot talk about that without talking about an uncomfortable part of what American history has been and a part of our current culture. So to start off, what I want to do is I'd like to read a couple of paragraphs from the forward of my forthcoming book. You know, it's not a shameless plug, but it is to let you know that it is coming out. My forthcoming book, From the Hood to the Woods, because it really does illuminate the key driving factors. And so I'm going to read that for you real quick. For over 40 years, I've had the pleasure of introducing urban youth of color and families to wild places and open spaces and outdoor recreation and education experiences. During this work, I have encountered and built relationships and interacted with the outdoor industry, including outfitters, retailers, land management agencies, land conservancies, and conservation groups, trail associations, small and large environmental organizations. And to say that people of color were underrepresented 40 years ago in the outdoor industry would be a gross understatement. Today, unfortunately, it still is a gross understatement. By and large, the outdoor industry and the land management sector, public and private, is dominated by white males. Now, the fact that they are white is not a problem. The fact that they are male is not a problem. But the fact that the overwhelming majority of them have little to no sustained experience interacting with people of color in the outdoors is a problem. These white males and the others who have accepted the status quo, and I'm not just talking about white men, definitely, are gatekeepers. And they set the organizational agendas, they develop the hiring standards, they establish the program, and interpret our natural resources all from the perspective seen through their own lens and filtered through their own biases. And they don't even know that they maintain these biases. And we all have them, so don't say, oh, I'm glad I don't have biases. We all have them. Now, often they are in positions of power that can make the greatest changes within any organization, but they don't know the least about what needs to be changed. So from that, that's from my forward I want to go.
Right. He is a phenomenal speaker. We would encourage you all to buy that book to continue his shameless plug. But it is a really great opportunity to think more critically about, the work that needs to happen and why that's important for us as outdoor educators and as folks who engage in this work. And how do we encourage, again, a more critical understanding of that work. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit now that we've been set the stage. Sort of hopefully we're understanding what we're talking about, on the same page as some of our terminology. We're going to shift gears to talk more about Leave No Trace. So I'm turn over to Grace.
So these are the 7 principles you can check out. Leave No Trace. They have a great website that's super easy to follow. And so when I got certified in Leave No Trace, these are the 7 principles that I learned and how to follow them. So now to get into a further critique of Leave No Trace. So Evan and I came up with the idea of looking at Leave No Trace more critically after I saw this Instagram post from, excuse my French, how to not travel like a basic bitch. So Dr. Kiona is a digital creator, and she posted this that got me thinking about how Leave No Trace, while is a good guiding principle to the outdoors, is maybe exclusionary. It doesn't include all types of outdoor enthusiasts that maybe was intended to be for. So we're going to look at some of the principles a little bit closer. So principle 4 is leave what you find, and generally it says that like good campsites are found, they're not made. You shouldn't alter the existing environment. You should respect it as it is and not make too many alterations for users. And then a lot of people might be outside, they might say, oh, those are pretty flowers, I'm going to take some, or there's some pretty rocks, and they might want to take a few, but if everyone's taking just a few, then what is going to be left? So Leave No Trace kind of is a list of rules, and to some it might just sound like know this, know that, and there are so many barriers, how am I going to have fun in the outdoors? And so Dr. Kiona leaves this critique that indigenous peoples who've been taking care of the land for thousands of years prior, who use the land to forage for food, medicines, items for prayer and ceremony, dance, they do need to take things from the environment, and that is okay for them. So Leave No Trace maybe should create more room for varying types of cultures and practices so that it can be more inclusive than it was initially written to be. So again, like there is nothing wrong with saying leave what you find. We do want to respect the earth, and how it is and be good stewards, but we need to be mindful that in a different context and for different people and cultures, we need to make a little bit more room for more acceptance of varying ideas of leaving what you find. Another one is Principle 7. It says to be considerate of other visitors. And we all love to go outside because it is aesthetically beautiful, and we might have this feeling of solitude and like be humbled by how vast nature is in the natural world is, which is great. But Leave No Trace also goes on to say that it's a good idea to travel in small groups, to be kind of quiet, don't bring loud music into the outdoor environment, and to also avoid trips on holidays and busy weekends, or take a trip during the off season. But if we're going to be more critical of this, we realize that not everyone has the means to take a trip on a holiday because they might have to work on that holiday. If you come from a large family, you can't just go in a small group. If you are from a Black, Indigenous, or other person of color marginalized community, you might feel safer traveling in a larger than smaller group outside. And so, again, when it's a list of seemingly no statements, it can feel really intimidating as an entry level outdoors enthusiast, as a beginner, to start exploring the outdoors. And so a lot of frontline workers, as we've seen through COVID, tend to be Black, Indigenous people of color. And so they don't have off all the time on the weekends or holidays. So they're, of course, going to go and recreate outside if they have the time to, like on the holidays, if that is the one day that they have off. So again, it's just examining how some language here might be more exclusive rather than inclusive.
I think just before we move on, so we chose Leave No Trace as an example, again, because of Dr. Kayana's work and the wonderful critique that she is presenting to us. But it's something that we're all fairly familiar with. Whether it's a sign at the trailhead, something on our website, something that we build into our programming. It's one of those things that feels sort of unobtrusive. Of course we want to make sure we're protecting the natural world, and that's absolutely and 100% true. I think to what we're trying to offer to you all to think about is, again, like Andrew mentioned at the beginning, is the implementation thereof. Right? So we can have all the best policies and practices and procedures in the world, as we move into the implementation phase, whether it's our staff in the field, whether it's that sign at the trailhead that folks hear and then maybe perceive in different ways, are we perpetuating the sense that outdoors is only for white folks? Right? Are we perpetuating this idea that in order to be someone who engages in the outdoors, you have to have high socioeconomic status, you have to have all of these disposable income pieces where you can purchase additional gear, right? So one of the Leave No Trace things is thinking about, don't wear bright colored clothing in the outdoors, which makes perfect sense. I don't really want to see your neon green t-shirt. However, if that's what's available to you and that's what you can access and afford, why should you not be able to wear that, right? And so again, as we move past thinking about this is not just a series of no's, but an opportunity for us to think more critically about how do we implement some of this work.
Okay, so we're going to do breakout rooms again if Natalie can help facilitate that. And so we just want you guys to think about some of these things that you've just heard and just discuss with your group, like if there's anything new that you just heard that you never really thought about, some of your initial reactions so far, and maybe add it into the context of what your position is in the outdoor world, in the sustainability world. What questions do you have? Have you ever considered these topics before? Yeah, so get into that conversation and then bring back some ideas when you are done. Thanks, Natalie.
How long do you want them for?
5 minutes.
Okay.
All right, everyone, welcome back. So we would love to hear some of your thoughts and things that came up in your group, anything you learned, anything you have more questions on. If you don't want to unmute your mic on your device, you can use the chat box and watching that as well. Don't be shy.
Something that we talked about in our group was how like this topic, and it's really interesting to see like a critical lens of LNT and ways that we can like kind of use the good parts and then rethink it so that we can have it be something that's really accessible and open and useful for people. And I was saying that it's kind of making me consider a bunch of other things that we like learn and preach and share without thinking about it critically. And I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think of like, oh my God, how many other things have I learned and just accepted without taking this lens and thinking, who am I excluding? Who isn't this open to? What are ways that we can make this even better? And so I really appreciate you both kind of providing this lens to critically think about the things that I often take for granted in this work. So yes, thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that's exactly the point. LNT is a great guiding principle, but it doesn't have to be taken word for word. You know, like, oh, hold on, let me share my screen. I didn't realize I wasn't sharing my screen. No? Okay. There it is. Okay. Everyone's seeing a green screen now? Okay, great. So LNT, exactly, just like I said, take it for a grain of salt. It doesn't have to be followed word for word. It should be open to interpretation because it should be open to the context of where you are and who is there. Always, always, always follow the local guidelines. They're the best guiding principle when we are in the outdoor environment. And so it exactly like Dina was saying, we should be challenging these things. LNT was made by white people, maybe just for white people. And so now we need to think more critically about how we can open up the realm of outdoor education and outdoor recreation and sustainability and all these other things so that they are more inclusive for all people. Anyone have any other responses, thoughts, questions after that? Is anyone in the chat box? I haven't checked it for a moment. Okay, all right. So now what are our next steps as a field, as an organization? What do we do with this information now? Dina was saying, like, I'm thinking about the other things, the other systems, the other guidelines that I follow. How could they be more inclusive? How can I challenge and critique the system as it is? Is it helping everyone? Is it pushing other people down? Is it lifting others up? So how can we appreciate organizations like Leave No Trace while also recognizing that they need critique? Any other thoughts on that that you guys want to share?
This is Jane. I'll just second what was said earlier, that such an important step is kind of before sharing some sort of messaging, pausing and thinking about how it can be more inclusive, how it could be misinterpreted, and doing the best to make everybody feel welcome in the outdoors while still encouraging them to protect the environment. And also, I guess I'm curious, are there any other sort of organizations or principles or things similar to Leave No Trace that can also be looked at?
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Thank you, Jane. So I think to your first point, so being aware of the things that we're posting, giving that sort of second glance. And within that, it's also really important for us to be self-reflective, right? Like Grace and I are both white folks. There's things that we're going to inherently miss. There's things that we don't know, that we don't understand. And so how do we sort of open ourselves up and be vulnerable in that space to ask other folks and to say, you know, hey, I'm thinking about putting fill in the blank policy into effect. Could y'all give us a read on it and tell us what you think? You know, and that's a hard conversation to engage in because we're potentially opening ourselves up for some really critical feedback. But that's also really important. You know, if we're not willing to engage in this conversation, again, organizationally or systemically, it makes it all the more difficult interpersonally. So to your second point, Jane, there's some really phenomenal organizations like Outdoor Pro, like Black Folks Camp 2. There's some really cool folks who are doing some really great work around decolonizing the outdoors and thinking about how outdoor education and outdoor spaces in general are not just for white folks. So those two specifically, you know, Outdoor Afro, which has a great social media presence and some really great resources, and then Black Folks Camp 2, which is a nonprofit based here in North Carolina, actually, that does some really great work as well. There's some other great resources. So Dr. Carolyn Finney wrote a really phenomenal book called Black Faces, White Spaces, which is an excellent resource. There's other books that are not necessarily from our field, but can give some good perspectives. So one, for example, For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood is by Dr. Chris Emdin, E-M-D-I-N, which provides a great opportunity for thinking about folks of dominant identities. How do we challenge and critique our own perspectives and our own ideas?
Can you hear us clearly, or are you getting a kickback on the sound?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane.
Just wanted to check that.
Technology is hard. But yeah, Jane, I think those are both phenomenal questions. And so both, how do we do this work individually, right? How do I recognize and critique my own stuff that I bring to the table? And then how do we intentionally seek out voices from other folks that we might not have before? You know, Dr. Kiana is a voice that I necessarily wouldn't have seen, right? A, because I'm not on Instagram, but then B, because that she presents a critique to something that I might hold near and dear. You know, I am a Leave No Trace master educator. I have a Leave No Trace tattoo, right? Like there is some part of me that's like, no, like Leave No Trace is great. You can't critique that, right? And I immediately engage with a sense of defensiveness. But it's important to put that aside and say, you know, let me hear what you're trying to say and what you're trying to point out, and let me do some self-reflection on how are the things that I do again, either perpetuating or dismantling those systems of oppression. And oppression can be sort of little O or big O, right? It doesn't have to be, system level sort of broad scale policy world, but if my work as a Leave No Trace educator is encouraging some people, even implicitly, that the outdoors is not for them, then that's not helpful, right? And I am perpetuating this series of oppressive acts.
Yeah, and think about all the messaging that is in the outdoor industry. You look at all these advertisements, catalogs, posters when you're shopping in REI. The people who are being represented are generally mostly white people. And so if you are a Black, Indigenous person of color, how do you feel like you fit into that space when your identity is not even being represented?
Yeah, I did another shameless plug for Dr. Carolyn Finney's book, Black Faces, White Spaces. She does a really phenomenal ethnographic study of both practicing hiring principles and of also marketing principles in national parks. And she literally goes through marketing brochures and counts the number of non-white faces that she sees. And it is an alarmingly low number, but also not a surprisingly low number, right? When we think about it, of course, it's a bunch of white folks in the field. But as we critique that and challenge that, what is our next step, right? So that's, again, some of these questions that we hope you all are leaving with. There's no clear answers to any of this work. There's no 5-step plan to make the outdoors, less racist and more inclusive. If there was, Grace and I would have a lot more money than we do now. But it's an opportunity for us to think contextually, specifically, organizationally. What does that look like for us? How are we doing this work as folks in the field? Yeah, there's lots of other really great resources too. So yes, please feel free to put others in the chat if you have them or know of them. Those are just the first 4 that spring to my mind. Other things that folks are interested in, curious about, have additional questions about, or resources that you would like to share?
I'm curious if anyone's aware of Leave No Trace, the Leave No Trace Center sort of directly addressing some of the criticism that they've faced, or altering any outreach messaging based on their criticism.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. As folks might know, Leave No Trace has a really phenomenal sort of list of specific principles in different contexts, right? Whether it's front country or snow skiing or fishing or beaches or whatever. I don't know that there is necessarily a cultural consideration for Leave No Trace. I would argue that that's something that would be useful and necessary, but I don't know as an organization if they have taken that up. And then I would, so at Elon in our work, we have been engaged in probably a 1.5 year long process to think more intentionally and about this in our context, right? What barriers do we put up for folks? How are we being intentionally inclusive or exclusive? And just speaking from that experience, this is really hard work, y'all. This is not an easy process. This is not something that we can sort of do overnight to make systemic change. We think about redistribution of resources at the very least, right? What are we giving money to? What are we giving staff time and energy to? That's really hard work. That's tough to be able to change quickly. So I would encourage you all to think about what does this look like in your space. Again, Leave No Trace is a mindset. It's not a set of hard and fast rules. There is contextual built into this. And so how do we adapt that? How do you implement it? How do you use it in your space? Grace is currently looking to see if there is anything that she can find about what Leave No Trace is doing. So if we do, we'll pop it in the chat. But yeah, I think it's a continually evolving process and conversation. And that's part of this, again, like I mentioned earlier, we never arrive at a spot of anti-racism because the world changes, right? Society changes. What was part of our conversation and our sort of standard of being a couple years ago is not now. And I think that's an interesting sort of continual evolution. So what will Leave No Trace continue to evolve to be? There's a couple chats that came in.
Yes, Kenneth says Donna Beagle for issues of poverty, opportunity, and education. Is Donna Beagle a writer? If you want to respond in the chat. And then Christine says perhaps the key is starting to introduce the outdoors to younger faces of less represented people to be more intentionally inclusive. Teach the kids the joys and principles at a young age, definitely. And then that will translate into this sense of environmental stewardship their whole life. There are so many studies that kids who have a positive experience in the outdoor environment will go on to live their lives prioritizing that. I'm wondering if all great resources. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so as you all continue to ponder, we are nearing the end of our time, so we really want to thank you all for being part of this conversation, for helping to promote this work, and again, hopefully continue to move the ball forward in your own spaces. We'd love to continue to be involved if there's anything that we can do or provide for you. We're also happy to share these slides if you weren't able to sort of jot notes down as quickly as you wanted. Send either one of us an email, and we are happy to make sure that you all have access to what you need. The two resources I put on the bottom are just starting points for you as anti-racist work might be newer to you, or you might want some additional sort of knowledge around that. Those are great spots to start on and to sort of delve more deeply into this work. There's a ton of other things, right? So this is by no means an exhaustive list, including the things that we've mentioned earlier. Really, again, want to thank you all for your time, for your engagement, for joining us with this. I know it's not an easy conversation to have, especially on a Friday afternoon of a tough week. So we appreciate you all for being here and being with us. And hopefully we're looking forward to how this conversation continues and how the work can continue to grow and evolve.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kenneth. Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you. Greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming. We really appreciate your time.
We're gonna not sure if we can see you all again. Yeah, so feel free to, if there's things that we can do, we can also put our emails in the chat so y'all have easier access to it. But yeah, we're more than happy to continue the conversation, point you on additional resources, or just nerd out with you about other things if you really want to talk more about this. Awesome. We all have a great rest of your day.